Prologue, the Storyteller's Invitation. Listen, dear travelers of the night, you who seek rest and respite in stories woven from moonlight and ancient wisdom. Close your eyes and let me carry you across the sands of time, to a place where the desert wind whispers secrets and the stars hold the memories of lovers long departed. This is a tale that belongs to the great tradition of 1001 Nights, a story of captivity and freedom, of magic and mortality, of a love so powerful it could break curses 300 years old. Let the world around you fade away. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your body sink into comfort as I unfold before you the story of Safiya, the desert rose, and Hadar, the captive prince. This is their story, told in their own words, beginning on a night when the sky itself seemed to go blind with darkness, when hope felt as distant as the morning star. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Chapter 1. The Night When Heaven Held Its Breath. My name is Safiya, and I begin my tale at the moment when I stood upon the flat roof of the Sultan's harem, my back pressed against sun-warmed stone that had already begun to cool in the night air, and before me stretched an abyss of darkness pierced only by the glinting points of the guards' spears far below. The night was thick, heavy with the perfume of jasmine that climbed the palace walls in defiant profusion, sweet with the scent of night-blooming flowers that the Sultan's gardeners cultivated in the courtyards below. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something momentous to occur, though whether it waited for my death or my salvation, I could not say. I was small, I had always been small, barely 5 feet in height, with a frame so delicate that the Sultan himself had once remarked I looked as though a strong wind might carry me away like a desert flower torn from its stem. My hair, long and wavy, cascaded down my back in dark rivers that caught what little moonlight penetrated the clouds. My eyes, large and brown, the color of dates at midnight, as the Sultan liked to say, stared out into that darkness below, trying to calculate odds that were not in my favor. Behind me, through the small door that led back into the harem's upper chambers, I could hear the distant sounds of the palace at night. Somewhere, musicians played for the Sultan's dinner guests. Somewhere, servants hurried through corridors carrying platters of honeyed sweets and cups of spiced wine. Somewhere, the other women of the harem, my fellow prisoners in this golden cage, prepared themselves for sleep, perhaps grateful for another day survived, perhaps praying that tomorrow the Sultan would not call for them. But I would not be sleeping in my small chamber tonight. I would not be praying for tomorrow, because if I did not act now, if I did not find the courage that seemed to be drowning in the ocean of fear inside my chest, there would be no tomorrow worth living. Only more days that bled into each other, indistinguishable and gray despite all the gold and silk that surrounded us. Only more nights of being something I was not, someone I had never wanted to be, a possession, a thing, a beautiful object kept behind walls for one man's pleasure. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the edges of my dark blue robe, the plainest garment I owned, chosen specifically because it would not catch moonlight and betray my presence to the guards who patrolled below. The fabric whispered against my skin like a conspirator, like a friend urging me forward, reminding me that I had already made my choice the moment I climbed these stairs. There was no going back now. There was only forward, into the darkness, into uncertainty, into possible death, or into freedom. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the parapet, feeling the rough stone beneath my fingertips, each grain and groove anchoring me to this moment, to this choice, to this precipice between one life and another. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird throwing itself against the bars, desperate and wild and utterly terrified. "Is this truly my last night?" I whispered to the indifferent stars that played hide and seek behind the thick clouds. "Am I nothing more than this, the sultan's plaything, a body clothed in gold and imprisoned in beauty? If I leap from this wall, if I trust my weight to that rope of tied scarves hanging against the outer wall, I will either find freedom or I will find death on the stones below, my blood mixing with the dust of this cursed palace, my story ending before it truly began." I closed my eyes, and hot tears traced paths down my cheeks, leaving trails of salt and sorrow on skin that the Sultan claimed was like honey and cream. How strange, I thought, that the body he praised so extravagantly felt like such a prison to me. How bizarre that the face he called beautiful seemed like a mask I could not remove, hiding the person I truly was underneath all this carefully maintained perfection. "But if I remain," I continued my whispered conversation with the universe, "if I surrender to fear and climb back through that door behind me, back down the stairs, back to my small room with its silk cushions and golden bars on the window, if I do that, then I will die slowly, piece by piece, night after night, until there is nothing left of the girl I once was, until Safiya disappears entirely and only the Sultan's favorite remains, a hollow shell performing a role, speaking words that mean nothing, existing but not living." The clouds shifted, and for a moment a sliver of moon appeared, casting pale silver light across the palace rooftops. In that brief illumination I could see the city spread out below, a labyrinth of narrow streets and flat-roofed houses, of markets that would be bustling come morning, of lives being lived by people who were free to walk where they chose, to speak their minds, to love whom they wanted. Free. Such a simple word, such an impossible concept for someone like me. I had been stolen from my family's oasis when I was barely 16 summers old. 9 years, 9 long years I had survived in this place, learning to smile when I wanted to scream, to dance when I wanted to run, to submit when every fiber of my being wanted to fight. 9 years of becoming an expert at deception, at hiding my true self so deep inside that sometimes I wondered if she still existed at all, or if the Sultan had finally succeeded in erasing her completely. But she did exist. I knew she did. Because late at night, when I was finally alone in my chamber, when the performance could stop and the mask could slip, I would stand at my barred window and look up at the same stars that shone over my family's distant oasis, and I would whisper promises to that hidden self. "One day," I would say, "one day I will leave this place. One day I will be more than this. One day someone will love me not because they own me, not because they purchased me like a bolt of fine silk or a string of pearls, but because they choose me, because they see me, truly see me, and decide that Safiya, just Safiya, is worth choosing." It was a foolish dream, perhaps, the dream of a girl who had listened to too many of her grandmother's stories, who had believed too deeply in tales of great love and noble princes and magic that could transform the world. The dream of someone who still thought that freedom and love were possible for people like her. "Perhaps," I whispered to the night, to the stars, to whatever gods or spirits might be listening, "perhaps I am simply a foolish girl who still believes in beautiful lies. Perhaps freedom is nothing more than a story we tell ourselves to make captivity bearable. Perhaps love, real love, the kind that chooses rather than purchases, perhaps that only exists in grandmother's tales, not in the real world where girls are stolen from their families and sold to old men who collect them like treasures. But even as these dark thoughts swirled through my mind like smoke, I felt something else rising up from deep within my chest. A spark, a flame, a stubborn, fierce, absolutely unquenchable refusal to accept these thoughts as truth. No, freedom was not just a story. I had tasted it once, in those 16 years before the raiders came. I had known what it meant to run barefoot through an oasis, to help my father heal the sick, to weave beside my mother, to listen to my grandmother's stories under stars that belonged to no one and everyone. I had been free once, and that memory, that knowledge of what freedom felt like, had sustained me through 9 years of captivity. And love, real love, perhaps I had never experienced it romantically, had never known a lover's touch that was gentle rather than possessive. But I had known my grandmother's love, fierce and unconditional, my mother's love, patient and nurturing, my father's love, quiet and steadfast. I had known what it meant to be valued for myself, not for my appearance or my utility. That knowledge, too, had kept me alive when survival seemed harder than surrender. So no, I was not foolish to believe in freedom and love. I was not naive to think they were possible. I was simply someone who remembered what it meant to be human rather than property, and who refused to forget no matter how many years passed, no matter how many times the Sultan's cold hands touched skin that did not want to be touched. I opened my eyes and looked down at the guards below. They paced in their predictable patterns, torches creating pools of orange light in the darkness. They were bored. I could see it in the casual way they held their spears, in the way they chatted with each other during their rounds. They were guarding against people trying to break into the palace, not against foolish girls trying to break out. That was their mistake, and it would be my salvation. I had been planning this escape for months. No, if I was honest, I had been planning it for years. Every time I was escorted through the palace, I memorized routes and exits. Every time I stood on a balcony, I studied the walls and calculated distances. Every conversation I overheard between guards, every scrap of information I could glean about routines and shift changes, I had hoarded all of it like a miser hoarding gold, storing it away for this moment. Tonight was perfect because the Sultan was entertaining important visitors from the eastern provinces. The entire palace was in controlled chaos, extra guards at the main entrances, but fewer in the less important areas because they needed the manpower elsewhere. Extra servants rushing about, meaning that one more person moving through the corridors might go unnoticed. And most importantly, the Sultan himself was occupied with his guests, drinking wine and watching dancers, completely unaware that one of his favorite possessions was about to slip through his fingers. The irony was not lost on me. The Sultan's greed, his need to display his wealth and power to visiting dignitaries, had created the very opportunity I needed to escape him, but I could not leave empty-handed. If I was going to risk everything, if I was going to face possible death in the desert that stretched beyond the city walls, I wanted to take something with me. Not gold or jewels, those would be too obvious, too easily traced. Something else, something that felt like justice, like taking back a piece of what had been stolen from me. Earlier that evening, in the chaos of the feast preparations, I had done something either very brave or very foolish. I had slipped away from the other harem women, had crept through corridors I was not supposed to know existed, and had made my way to the Sultan's treasure room. The guard at the door was an older man named Hassan, who had a weakness for the date wine that was technically forbidden to the palace guards. I had spent weeks befriending him during those rare moments when our paths crossed, always respectful, always kind, occasionally bringing him sweets from the harem's kitchens. He liked me, I think, in the way an old man might like a granddaughter. with gentle affection and no ulterior motives. So when I approached him that evening, when I gave him a cup of especially strong date wine and whispered that I just wanted to see the treasure room, wanted to look at pretty things to cheer myself up because the Sultan had been cruel earlier, a lie, but Hassan believed it. He had hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Just a quick look," he said, his words already slightly slurred from the wine. "Don't touch anything, and if anyone asks, I never saw you." "Thank you, Hassan," I had said, meaning it. "May your kindness return to you threefold." He had unlocked the heavy door and let me slip inside, and I had found myself in a room that would have made a merchant weep with envy. Chests overflowing with gold coins that caught the lamplight and threw it back in shimmering waves. Necklaces of diamonds and rubies draped over wooden stands like frozen waterfalls of fire and ice. Swords with hilts encrusted with emeralds and sapphires, each one worth more than my entire village could earn in a year. Bolts of silk in every color imaginable, crimson and azure, emerald and gold, midnight purple and sunrise pink. Any reasonable thief would have filled their pockets with the most valuable items they could carry, would have grabbed handfuls of gems and gold and run. But I was not a reasonable thief. I was a desperate girl looking for something that spoke to me, something that felt like destiny rather than just monetary value. My eyes had been drawn to a vessel sitting alone on a high shelf, dusty and unremarkable among all the glittering treasures surrounding it. It was neither beautiful nor particularly valuable in appearance, just a large container made of tarnished metal, covered in strange symbols I could not read, with a heavy stopper sealed with wax that looked older than memory. I should not have wanted it. By any logical measure, it was worthless compared to the treasures around it. But something about it called to me, whispered to me in a language that had nothing to do with words. It felt warm even from a distance, as though it contained something alive, something waiting. And more than that, it felt important, significant, like a key to a door I had not yet discovered. I had pulled a small stool over to the shelf, climbed up, my small stature making the reach difficult, and lifted the vessel down. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, as though it contained something much denser than air. The metal was warm against my palms, almost hot, and I could have sworn I felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat or a distant drumming. "What are you?" I had whispered to it, running my fingers over the strange symbols. They seemed to shift and change under my touch, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost made sense, that hovered on the edge of meaning without quite revealing their secrets. The vessel had no answer, of course. It was just an object, a thing, probably containing some exotic oil or preserved fruit or medicinal compound. But I had tucked it into the deep pocket of my robe anyway, feeling the weight of it settle against my hip like a promise or a prophecy. When I had emerged from the treasure room, Hassan had been dozing at his post, the empty cup on the floor beside him. I had slipped past him like a ghost and made my way back to the harem, my heart pounding with the audacity of what I had done, my mind already turning to the next phase of my plan. Now, standing on the roof with that stolen vessel hidden in my robes, I allowed myself a grim smile. "Everyone else grasps for gold and precious stones," I murmured, "and I steal a dusty pitcher. Perhaps this will be my only souvenir of freedom, if I live until dawn to enjoy it. Perhaps I am the greatest fool who ever walked these palace halls. Or perhaps—" I touched the vessel through the fabric of my robe, feeling its warmth. "Perhaps I have stolen something far more valuable than gold, even if I cannot yet understand what it is." The rope of tied scarves waited for me, secured to a stone column, trailing down the outer wall into the darkness below. I had spent weeks collecting those scarves, stealing one here and there from the laundry, choosing the strongest fabrics, knotting them together with the kind of precision my mother had taught me when making her beautiful, woven carpets. Each knot had been tested and retested until I was certain it would hold my weight. But certainty and faith are different things, and as I looked at that rope disappearing into darkness, I felt faith wavering. What if the knots come loose? What if a scarf tears? What if I fall and break on the stones below, dying in darkness with no one to mourn me, no one to even know I tried? The questions spiraled through my mind like vultures circling a dying animal. But then I thought about the alternative. Waking up tomorrow in my golden cage, submitting to the Sultan's touch once again, watching my soul erode day by day, year by year, until nothing remained but a beautiful shell with no one living inside. No, I said aloud, surprised by the strength in my voice. No, I will not accept that. If I die tonight, at least I will die trying. At least my last act will be one of defiance rather than submission. At least I will die as Sophia, not as the Sultan's favorite. I grabbed the rope, tested it one final time, and was about to begin my descent when I heard it. A sound that froze the blood in my veins and turned my newfound courage to ice. The Sultan's voice, bellowing from somewhere in the palace below, carrying across the courtyard with the force of absolute rage. Find her! The girl with eyes like midnight dates, the one with long dark hair. My favorite, she is missing. Someone has taken her, or she has run. I want every guard searching. I want every exit sealed. I want her found and brought back to me, alive or dead, I care not which. And the person who helps her, the person who hides her, the person who even looks at her with kindness, they will die. They will die slowly and publicly as a lesson to all who would defy their sultan. Find her. The words rang out across the palace complex like a death sentence, and I understood with perfect, terrible clarity what they meant. He had discovered my absence. Somehow, despite the chaos of the feast, despite the fact that I should have had hours before anyone noticed I was missing. Someone had checked my chamber, had found it empty, had reported to the Sultan that his favorite possession was missing, and now the entire palace was about to become a hunting ground, with me as the prey. I did not hesitate, could not hesitate. Hesitation meant capture, and capture meant a fate worse than the death the Sultan threatened. I grasped the rope of scarves and began lowering myself down the wall, hand over hand, my arms burning with the effort, my breath coming in short gasps. Below me, I could already hear the sound of running feet, the bang of the Sultan's hunting dogs being released, the sharp commands of guards organizing search parties. Torches flared to life throughout the palace complex, transforming night into a nightmare of dancing shadows and harsh light. My hands slipped slightly on the rope, and for one heart-stopping moment I thought I would fall. But somehow I managed to hold on, to keep descending, to keep moving toward the ground, even as every instinct screamed at me to climb back up to safety. But there was no safety above, only the illusion of it. Only a golden cage waiting to close around me once more. The wall seemed to stretch on forever. My arms screamed with pain. My palms burned where the fabric of the scarves rubbed against skin. I could feel blisters forming and tearing, could feel wetness that was probably blood making my grip more slippery with each passing moment. Just a little further, I whispered to myself through gritted teeth. Just a little more, Sophia. You can do this. You have survived 9 years in that place. You can survive this one descent. Just hold on. And then, miraculously, my feet touched solid ground. I had made it. I was down. I looked around quickly, orienting myself. The outer wall of the palace complex was still ahead, but I was in a service area now, a place where delivery carts came and went during the day. The gate would be guarded, but perhaps in the chaos of the search, perhaps with the right timing, I ran. Not toward the main gates where guards would be thickest, but toward a small side entrance that I had noticed during one of my rare excursions to the palace gardens. It was a servant's entrance, used by those who came to tend the extensive gardens and clean the fountains. It was not supposed to be open at night, but I had observed that lazy guards sometimes left it unlocked to make their own comings and goings easier. My life now depended on the laziness of guards, on human nature's tendency toward convenience over duty. The vessel bounced heavily against my hip as I ran, but I did not regret taking it. It felt like a talisman, a promise of something I could not yet name. And if I was going to die tonight, if the Sultan's men caught me, if the dogs tracked me down, at least I would die knowing I had taken something from him, something that felt important even if I did not understand why. The small gate loomed ahead. I could see it in the torchlight, a simple wooden door set into the massive outer wall, locked or unlocked, open or barred. Everything depended on the answer to that question. I reached the gate and pulled on the handle with shaking hands. It opened. The universe, it seemed, had granted me this one small mercy. The gate was unlocked, left that way by some careless guard who valued his own convenience over the Sultan's security. I slipped through and found myself in the streets of the city, in the world outside the palace walls, tasting freedom for the first time in 9 years. The city spread before me, a maze of narrow streets and dark alleys, of sleeping houses and shuttered shops. Somewhere in this labyrinth was a path to the desert, to the world beyond, to a future that was mine to choose. But first, I had to survive this night. First, I had to escape not just the palace, but the city itself. And behind me, growing louder with each passing moment, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, the baying of hounds, the shouts of guards, the thunder of boots on stone. The hunt had begun, and I was the prey they sought. Chapter 2. The Sands That Remember Blood. The desert at night is a place of profound transformation, dear listeners. Let me paint for you the world I entered as I finally slipped past those guards, as I finally left the city walls behind and felt the first grains of sand beneath my feet. During the day, the desert is a furnace, a killing field where the sun beats down with the fury of an angry god, and the sand burns any exposed skin until it blisters and weeps. The air shimmers with heat that distorts reality, making distant objects dance and waver, turning the horizon into a liquid boundary between earth and sky. It is a place that demands respect, that shows no mercy to the foolish or unprepared. But at night, oh, at night, the desert becomes something else entirely, something mysterious and ancient and almost magical. The temperature drops so quickly you can feel it happening, can sense the heat bleeding out of the sand beneath your feet like life draining from a wound. Within an hour of sunset, the burning sands that would have scorched your skin become cool enough to walk upon comfortably. Within 2 hours, they become cold, genuinely cold, stealing warmth from your body, making you shiver and pull your robes tighter around yourself. The silence is what strikes you first. In the city, there is always sound, the murmur of voices, the cry of vendors, the bark of dogs, the endless susurrus of humanity going about its business. But in the desert at night, the silence is so complete it becomes almost tangible, almost oppressive. You can hear your own heartbeat like a drum in your ears. You can hear the whisper of fabric against skin as you move. You can hear the wind, always the wind, carrying secrets across the empty spaces. And the stars, oh, the stars. In the city you see stars, yes, but they are dim things, washed out by the glow of torches and lamps, competing with smoke and haze for visibility. But in the desert, far from any human habitation, the stars are not dim. They are brilliant, blazing. They fill the sky from horizon to horizon in rivers and clusters and streams of light so dense you feel you could reach up and plunge your hands into them like water. This was the world I entered when I finally escaped the city's grasp, when I finally felt the sand beneath my feet and saw nothing but darkness and stars ahead of me. I ran. I ran with everything I had, driven by terror and hope and the sound of pursuit behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps that burned in my lungs. My legs, unused to such exertion after years of confinement, trembled and threatened to collapse beneath me with every step. The vessel in my robes bounced against my hip with bruising force, but I did not stop, could not stop, because behind me I could hear them coming. The Sultan's hunters, 7 men in black cloaks, mounted on the fastest horses in the royal stables, trained to track and capture and kill if necessary. I had heard stories about them in the harem, whispered tales shared between the women in the darkest hours before dawn. They were legendary for their efficiency, their ruthlessness, their absolute refusal to return empty-handed. Once the Sultan set his hunters on someone's trail, that person had 2 choices: surrender or die. There was no third option. There was no escape, except that I had to escape. Had to. Because surrender meant returning to captivity, and death, well, death at least had the virtue of being final. Death at least meant that the Sultan could no longer touch me, could no longer claim ownership over my body and soul. So I ran into that vast darkness, my small figure insignificant against the immensity of sand and sky, running not toward any particular destination, but simply away, away, away from the life I could no longer endure. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew more organized, more purposeful. I could hear the baying of hounds, the Sultan's hunting dogs, bred for tracking, able to follow a scent across miles of desert. I could hear the thunder of hooves as the mounted hunters began to spread out, creating a net to catch me, no matter which direction I ran. My heart, already racing from exertion, threatened to burst from my chest with pure terror. This was it. This was the moment when my escape attempt would end, when I would be caught and dragged back to face whatever punishment the Sultan had devised for those who dared defy him. No, I gasped into the darkness, my voice barely audible over my panting breath. No, not like this. Not after everything. Please. I was praying, I realized. Praying to gods I was not sure I believed in anymore. Praying to the universe itself. Praying to anything that might be listening and might care about the fate of one small girl running for her life across an empty desert. And then, as if in answer to my desperate prayers, I saw it ahead, a darker shadow against the darkness, a shape that resolved itself as I drew closer into a building. A caravanserai, one of those roadside inns scattered across the desert routes where travelers could rest and water their animals before continuing their journeys. Hope flared in my chest like a struck match. If I could reach that caravanserai, if I could find help or at least a place to hide, perhaps I could evade my pursuers long enough to gain more distance, to disappear into the vast emptiness beyond. I pushed my protesting body to move faster, to cover the remaining distance between myself and that promise of sanctuary. My legs felt like they were made of sand themselves, ready to collapse and scatter with each step. My lungs burned as though I were breathing fire rather than air, but I kept moving, kept running, kept reaching for that fragile possibility of survival. The caravanserai grew larger as I approached. I could see it more clearly now, a square structure built around a central courtyard, with thick walls designed to withstand sandstorms and protect travelers from the worst the desert could offer. Lamplight flickered from a few windows, suggesting people were still awake, going about their evening routines. I burst through the entrance into the courtyard, startling several camels that were bedded down for the night. They groaned in protest at the disturbance, their complaints echoing off the walls. A few travelers who had been sitting around a small fire looked up in surprise at my sudden, dramatic entrance. I stood there for a moment, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, trying to make my panicked mind work, trying to figure out what to do next. My body shook with exhaustion and fear. My lungs felt like they might tear themselves apart with each gasping breath. And in the distance, growing steadily closer, I could hear the sounds of my pursuers. "Child, are you well?" The voice was female, elderly, rich with the kind of authority that comes from long experience. I looked up to see an old woman sitting by the fire, her face deeply lined by sun and years, her eyes sharp and knowing beneath the scarf wrapped around her head. "Please," I managed to gasp out between breaths. "Please, I need help. I need water. I swallowed hard, tasting blood in my mouth from running so hard. "I need a dark cloth to cover myself. I can work for it. I can help with animals or anything you need. Please." The old woman studied me with those sharp eyes, taking in my expensive but disheveled clothing, my wild hair escaping from its pins, my face that was probably a mask of fear and desperation. She was quiet for a long moment, the silence stretching until I thought she might refuse me, might turn me away, or worse, might call the guards herself. Then she gestured to an empty space beside the fire with one gnarled hand. "Sit," she commanded in a voice like gravel and honey mixed together. "You look like you're about to collapse, and I don't need that kind of drama in my courtyard. Sit, drink some water, and catch your breath. Then we'll talk about what you need." I nearly wept with gratitude. I staggered over to the fire and collapsed beside it, my legs finally giving out completely. The old woman handed me a clay cup filled with water, and I drank so greedily, so desperately, that water spilled down my chin and soaked into my robe. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted, cool and clean and life-giving. "Slowly," the old woman advised, watching me with what might have been amusement or concern or both. "Drink too fast and you'll make yourself sick, and then you really will be useless to me." I forced myself to slow down, to sip rather than gulp, even though every cell in my body screamed for more water, more. As my breathing gradually returned to something approaching normal, as the immediate panic began to recede slightly, I became aware that the old woman was still watching me, still studying me with those knowing eyes. "You're running from something," she said. It was not a question. Or someone. Something that scares you badly enough that you're willing to run into the desert at night with nothing but the clothes on your back and... Her eyes flicked to the bulge in my robe where the vessel rested. "Whatever that is you're carrying." "I cannot tell you the details," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from exertion and thirst. "For your own safety. But yes, I am running, and there are men pursuing me who will not stop, who will not give up. I need to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between myself and them. But I also need..." I looked down at my expensive robe, my uncovered hair, all the things that marked me as someone from the palace. "I need to look different, less noticeable, less like what they're searching for." The old woman was quiet again, her eyes distant, as though remembering something painful. When she spoke, her voice was softer, sadder. I had a daughter once, she said. Beautiful girl, full of life and dreams. She was taken, sold to pay her father's gambling debts. I never saw her again. Years later, I heard she died trying to escape from the man who bought her. Died in the desert, alone and afraid, because no one helped her when she needed it. My eyes filled with tears at the pain in her voice, at the weight of old grief that still hung heavy in her words. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The old woman waved away my sympathy with one weathered hand. "The past is the past, and sorrow doesn't change it. But perhaps," she looked at me again, and this time I saw determination in her gaze. "Perhaps I can help you where I failed to help her. Perhaps I can make sure that you, at least, have a chance to survive, to escape whatever it is you're running from." "You don't have to risk yourself for me," I said, though hope was blooming in my chest like a flower opening to the sun. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "I owe it to my daughter's memory," the old woman said firmly. "And more than that, I owe it to every girl who's been taken, sold, used, treated like property instead of a person. Now come. We don't have much time if those pursuers you mentioned are close behind." She stood with surprising agility for someone her age and beckoned for me to follow. We walked across the courtyard to a small storage room where she kept supplies for her business. She rummaged through various items, pulling out a dark burnous, the heavy hooded cloak worn by desert travelers, and a headscarf that would cover my distinctive long hair. "Put these on," she instructed. "They're plain, common, the kind of thing any traveler might wear. They'll make you far less noticeable than that fancy palace robe you're wearing." I quickly shed my blue robe and pulled on the burnous. It was rough against my skin, coarse and practical rather than fine and decorative. It smelled of sand and animals and honest sweat, the sense of freedom rather than captivity. The old woman helped me wrap the headscarf around my head, tucking away every strand of my long dark hair until nothing remained visible that might identify me. "There," she said with satisfaction, stepping back to look at her handiwork. "Now you look like any other desert traveler. Keep your head down, your face covered, and perhaps they won't look twice at you." "Thank you," I breathed, overcome with gratitude for this stranger's kindness. "You don't know what this means to me. You don't know what you've given me." "I know more than you think," the old woman said softly. Then her expression became more serious. "But child, I need to be honest with you. These clothes will help, but they won't be enough if your pursuers are truly determined. The desert is vast, but it's also unforgiving. Do you have water? Food? Do you know where you're going? How to survive out there?" I hesitated, then admitted the truth. "I have very little water, no food, and my plan was simply to go east, toward the distant oases where I grew up. But that's days of travel away, maybe weeks, and My voice broke. "I don't know if I can make it that far." The old woman nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "East is good. There are settlements in that direction, places where a girl like you might find sanctuary. But you need supplies. Wait here." She disappeared into another room and returned a few minutes later with a water skin and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Water and food," she said, pressing them into my hands. "Not much, but enough for a few days if you're careful. Ration it wisely. The desert is cruel to those who waste resources." I wanted to pay her, to offer something in return, but I had nothing. Nothing except, "One of my camels has a wound on its leg," the old woman said, as though reading my thoughts. "It's infected, swollen. My old hands aren't steady enough anymore to treat it properly, and I'm afraid I might lose the animal if it doesn't get proper care. You said you could help with animals. Can you?" "Yes," I said immediately. "My father was a healer. He taught me how to treat wounds and infections in both people and animals. If you have clean water and any herbs, I can make a poultice that should help. Relief flooded the old woman's weathered face. Come then, quickly. Help my camel and we'll call your debt paid. She led me to the animal enclosure where a large camel was indeed favoring one leg, clearly in distress. I knelt beside it, examining the wound by lamplight. It was badly infected, hot and swollen, oozing fluid. The camel groaned softly, its large eyes rolling in pain and fear. "Shh," I murmured to the animal, running my hand gently along its neck. "Shh, I know it hurts. I'm going to help you. Just stay calm for me." The old woman brought me clean water, clean cloth, and a selection of dried herbs from her stores. I worked quickly but carefully, cleaning the wound, mixing a poultice of honey and herbs that would fight the infection and promote healing, wrapping it securely with the clean cloth. The camel stood surprisingly still throughout the process, as though it understood I was trying to help. "There," I said finally, sitting back on my heels. "Change the dressing every day, keep it clean, and the infection should clear up within a week or so. He's strong. He'll recover." "You have healing hands," the old woman observed, watching me with approval. "And a gentle way with animals. Your father taught you well." "My father taught me many things," I said softly, feeling a pang of grief and longing for my family, for the life I had lost 9 years ago. I hope someday I can see him again, can thank him for all those lessons. "You will," the old woman said with unexpected certainty. "I feel it. You have a survivor's spirit, child. You'll make it through this trial and find your way home." Before I could respond, before I could thank her again, or ask how she could be so certain, we heard sounds from outside the caravanserai. The sound of approaching horses, the jingle of harnesses, voices calling out in the night. The hunters! They had arrived. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I looked at the old woman in panic, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do, where to hide, how to escape. But she grabbed my arm firmly, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. "There's a back gate," she said urgently, speaking quickly and quietly. "Through that far wall, there's a small door we use for emergencies. It opens directly onto the desert on the eastern side. Go now, while they're still coming in through the front. Follow the stars. See those 3 bright ones in a row?" She pointed upward through the open roof of the enclosure. "Keep them to your left as you travel, and you'll be heading east. Go, child. Go quickly and quietly, and may whatever gods watch over desperate girls guide your steps." "Thank you," I whispered fiercely, gripping her hand. "Thank you for your kindness, for your help, for seeing me as a person worth saving. May your compassion be returned to you tenfold." "Just survive," she said, pushing me gently toward the back of the courtyard. "That will be thanks enough. Now go before they start searching the compound." I ran as quietly as I could to the far wall, found the small door she had mentioned, and pulled it open. Beyond lay the open desert, vast and dark and terrifying and beautiful all at once. I slipped through the door and into that immensity, closing it softly behind me. The moment I was outside, I heard voices from inside the caravanserai, harsh male voices, authoritative and demanding. The hunters had entered the compound and were beginning to question everyone inside. I did not wait to hear more. I ran into the desert, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the caravanserai, my new dark clothing helping me blend into the shadows. The sand was soft beneath my feet, making each step an effort, but I did not stop, could not stop, not until the lights of the caravanserai had disappeared behind me, and I was alone in an ocean of darkness and sand. Only then did I allow myself to pause, to bend over with my hands on my knees, to let the terror and relief wash over me in equal measure. I had escaped again. Somehow, miraculously, I had escaped. But even as relief flooded through me, I knew this was not over. The hunters were persistent and skilled. They would question everyone at the caravanserai. Eventually, someone might mention the girl who had arrived in distress, who had been given dark clothing, who had gone out the back gate heading east. The old woman would try to protect my secret, I believed that. But under interrogation, under threats, even the kindest person might break and reveal what they knew. I had bought myself time, nothing more. The hunters would follow. They would find my trail eventually. I needed to move faster, needed to be smarter, needed to somehow stay ahead of men who were better equipped, better trained, and far more experienced at this deadly game of pursuit and evasion. I looked up at the stars, found the 3 bright ones in a row that the old woman had shown me, and oriented myself. East. Keep them to my left. That way lay the distant oases, the remnants of my people, the possibility of home. That way lay hope. Chapter 3. The Vessel and the Voice. I walked through that first night in the desert, navigating by starlight, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and my pursuers. As the hours passed and dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and amber, I found myself in a landscape of rolling sand dunes that stretched endlessly in every direction. The beauty of it stole my breath. The first light of dawn turned the sand into molten gold, into rivers of copper and bronze that flowed and shifted with the breeze. The sky transformed from the deep blue-black of night into lighter and lighter shades of blue, with clouds catching fire in shades of pink and orange and crimson. I had almost forgotten how beautiful the world could be. 9 years in the harem, seeing nothing but courtyards and rooms in the same marble walls, I had almost forgotten that the world was vast and varied and full of natural wonders that had nothing to do with human architecture or decoration. But as beautiful as the dawn was, it also brought danger. With daylight came heat, and with heat came the need for shelter. I could already feel the temperature rising, could feel the sun's rays growing stronger as it climbed higher in the sky. I needed to find shade, needed to rest during the hottest part of the day. Travel at night, shelter by day. That was the desert survival rule my father had taught me long ago. I spotted a rock formation ahead, an outcropping that would provide some shade from the climbing sun. I made my way to it and found a natural overhang that created a small cave-like space. It was not comfortable. The ground was hard, scattered with stones, but it was shaded and protected from the worst of the day's heat. I settled into this makeshift shelter, taking a small sip from the water skin the old woman had given me. The water was warm and had a slightly mineral taste, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. I allowed myself a small portion of the food she had packed, some dried dates and flatbread, eating slowly to make it last. Then I lay down on the hard ground, using my arm as a pillow, and tried to sleep. Sleep came fitfully, broken by anxiety and discomfort and the oppressive heat that turned my shelter into an oven as the day progressed. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind churning with thoughts and fears and memories. I thought about my family, my mother with her patient hands and gentle wisdom, my father with his healer's knowledge and quiet strength, my grandmother with her stories and unwavering belief in love and magic. Were they still alive? Did they know what had happened to me? Had they spent these 9 years mourning me as dead? Or did they still hope I might somehow return? I thought about the harem, about the other women I had left behind. Would the sultan punish them for my escape? Would he take his rage out on them, blame them for not stopping me or reporting my suspicious behavior? Guilt twisted in my stomach at the thought, but I pushed it away. I could not save them, could barely save myself. All I could do was hope that the Sultan's anger would burn itself out quickly, that he would not make innocent women pay for my defiance. And I thought about the future, about what would happen if I actually survived this desperate flight across the desert. Where would I go? What would I do? I was a runaway slave with no resources, no protection, wanted by one of the most powerful men in the region. Even if I reached my family's oasis, even if by some miracle I found them alive and well, would I be bringing danger to their door by returning? Perhaps I should not go home at all. Perhaps I should aim for some distant city where no one knew me, where I could disappear into the crowds and start over with a new name and a new identity. I had healing skills. I could work as a midwife or herbalist, could build a quiet life of service and anonymity. But even as I contemplated this sensible, practical plan, my heart rebelled against it. I wanted to go home. I wanted to see my family again, to feel my mother's arms around me, to hear my father's voice, to stand on the soil of the oasis that had birthed and nurtured me. I wanted to reclaim my identity as Sophia of the desert people, not hide forever as some nameless stranger in a foreign city. Love and freedom, my grandmother had always said, those are the things worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Everything else is just details. Love and freedom. I had been denied both for so long. Now that I was fighting for my freedom, could I really give up on love as well? Could I really resign myself to a life alone, always hiding, always afraid? Perhaps, I whispered to the stone walls of my shelter, perhaps I'm being greedy. Perhaps I should be grateful just for freedom, just for the chance to live on my own terms. Perhaps love is too much to ask for, too much to hope for. Perhaps girls like me, broken, used, tainted by captivity, perhaps we don't get love stories. Perhaps survival is enough. But even as I said the words, I did not believe them. My grandmother's stories echoed in my memory, tales of great loves that conquered impossible odds, of people who refused to settle for less than everything, of magic and destiny and the power of refusing to give up hope. I want love, I admitted to the uncaring stones. I want someone to see me, really see me, not just my body or my face, but the person I am underneath. I want someone to choose me not because they've purchased me or captured me, but because they've looked into my eyes and recognized something that makes them want to stay. Is that too much to ask? Is it foolish to want that after everything? The stones, of course, had no answer. They simply absorbed my words and my pain and gave back only silence. I finally fell into a deeper sleep as the day reached its peak of heat, exhaustion, overcoming discomfort, and anxiety. I dreamed strange, fragmentary dreams of running through endless corridors that never led anywhere, of the Sultan's cold hands reaching for me, of my grandmother telling stories by firelight, of water just beyond reach, always just beyond reach. I woke as the day began to cool, as the sun sank toward the western horizon, and the worst of the heat began to dissipate. My mouth was dry, my lips cracked. I allowed myself another small sip of water and assessed my situation. One day and night of travel completed. How many more days until I reached the distant oases? 5? 10? I honestly did not know. The desert was vast, and my memories of geography were 9 years old and had never been particularly detailed. I ate a few dates, saving the flatbread for later, and prepared to resume my journey. My body ached from the hard ground and the previous night's exertion, but I forced myself to stand, to stretch, to prepare for another night of walking. As I emerged from my shelter, I looked back the way I had come, back toward the west, where the Sultan's city lay hidden beyond the horizon. I could see nothing, no signs of pursuit, no distant figures on the sand. But that meant nothing. The hunters were out there somewhere, following, searching, patient in their pursuit. "Let them come," I said softly, surprising myself with the defiance in my voice. "Let them chase me across this entire desert if they want. I will not go back willingly. I will not surrender. I will keep moving forward, keep reaching for freedom, until either I grasp it or die trying." I secured the vessel more carefully in my robes, adjusted my burnous and headscarf, and set off into the cooling evening, heading east toward the stars that were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The second night of walking was harder than the first. My body was already exhausted, already pushed beyond its normal limits. Blisters had formed on my feet from walking barefoot on sand. My muscles protested with every step, and thirst, constant, gnawing thirst, began to dominate my thoughts more and more as the night wore on. I rationed my water carefully, allowing myself only tiny sips at long intervals, but I could feel the water skin growing lighter, could calculate that at my current rate of consumption, I had perhaps 2 more days before it ran out completely. 2 days. And then what? Would I find another source of water before I died of thirst? Would I stumble upon a hidden spring or well? Or would I simply collapse in the sand and become another anonymous death, another foolish girl who thought she could cross the desert alone? "Stop it," I told myself firmly as my thoughts spiraled into darkness. "Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, you have water. You have food. You are alive and moving and free. Focus on that. Focus on the next step, and then the next, and then the next. Don't think about what might happen. Think about what is happening." It was good advice. I tried to follow it, but as the night wore on and my exhaustion deepened, it became harder and harder to stay focused, to keep moving, to resist the temptation to simply lie down in the sand and rest. Just rest for a moment. No, I could not stop. Stopping meant giving up. Stopping meant dying. I had to keep moving, had to maintain momentum, had to trust that eventually, I would find salvation, or at least a better death than collapsing alone in the desert. Dawn came again, and again I found shelter, this time beneath a cluster of desert scrub that provided minimal shade but was better than nothing. I slept fitfully through another day of oppressive heat, my water supply growing more precious with each sip, my food stores dwindling. That evening, as I prepared to resume my journey for a third night, I allowed myself to really examine my situation. The water would last 1 more day, maybe 2 if I was extremely careful. The food was nearly gone, a few dates, a small piece of flatbread. My body was weakening, my strength fading with each passing hour. I might not make it. The thought came unbidden but undeniable. I might die out here in this desert, might never reach the eastern oases, might never see my family again or experience the freedom I had risked everything to claim. "So be it," I whispered into the cooling air. "If I die, at least I die as myself. At least I die free. That's worth something. That has to be worth something." I set off into the third night with grim determination, 1 foot in front of the other, moving east, always east, following stars that seemed to mock me with their distant, cold beauty. And it was on that third night, when my water finally ran out completely, when I allowed myself the last drops and felt the terrible finality of the empty water skin, that I remembered the vessel, the mysterious container I had stolen from the Sultan's treasure room, the strange, heavy object that had called to me in ways I did not understand. I had been so focused on survival, on escape, on simply moving forward, that I had not thought about the vessel since leaving the caravanserai. But now, with my throat burning and my lips cracked and bleeding, With thirst consuming every thought, I found myself pulling the vessel from my robes and examining it by starlight. It was just as strange as I remembered. Tarnished metal covered in symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long, sealed with ancient wax, inexplicably heavy. What could be inside? Surely not water. The container had been sitting on that shelf for who knew how long, probably decades or centuries. If it had contained water once, it would have evaporated long ago. But perhaps it contained some other liquid, oil that could be burned for light, some exotic perfume or medicine that might have value in trade, or perhaps nothing at all, just an empty vessel that I had stolen for no good reason, adding weight to my burden for no benefit. My hands, trembling with exhaustion and dehydration, began to work at the wax seal. It was old and brittle, cracking and flaking away as I picked at it. The stopper beneath was stuck fast, sealed by time and perhaps by intention. "Please," I whispered to the vessel, to the universe, to whatever might be listening, "please let there be something useful inside. I don't need a miracle. I don't need magic or wishes or divine intervention. Just something, anything. A few drops of water, a hint of moisture, something to keep me alive just a little longer." The wax finally came away completely, and I began to twist the stopper, trying to loosen it from its centuries-long position. It did not want to move. It fought me, resisting my efforts as though determined to keep its secret sealed forever. But I was stubborn. I had always been stubborn. And I was also desperate, and those two qualities combined into a determination that would not be denied. I gripped the stopper with both hands and pulled with everything I had left. The stopper came free with a sound like a sigh, like breath held for centuries finally being released, and then the world exploded into chaos. Chapter 4. The Laughter in Empty Places. Blue smoke poured from the vessel's opening, not just a wisp or a thread, but a massive torrent of azure vapor that seemed impossible, that seemed to violate every law of physics I understood. The smoke billowed outward and upward, growing and expanding, filling the air around me until I could see nothing but swirling blue mist. The wind picked up with sudden violence, whipping sand into the air, creating a whirlwind that spun around me like a living thing. I was forced to close my eyes against the stinging assault of sand and wind, forced to drop to my knees and cover my face, wondering if this was it, if my foolish decision to open the vessel had somehow unleashed my death. The vessel tumbled from my hands, rolling across the sand, but I barely noticed, too focused on trying to breathe, trying to stay upright in the midst of this impossible storm. The wind howled around me with a sound that was almost like laughter, wild and free and utterly inhuman. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The wind died, the sand settled, the blue smoke began to coalesce, to take shape, to become something, someone. I opened my eyes cautiously, blinking away tears and sand, and found myself looking up at an impossible sight. A man, or at least something shaped like a man, towered above me. He was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet if not more, and his form flickered and shifted between solid and translucent, as though he could not quite decide whether to be flesh or smoke. He wore clothing from another era, rich garments that looked like they belonged to ancient kings, embroidered in gold and silver thread that caught the starlight and threw it back in shimmering patterns. The fabrics were impossibly elegant despite being worn by a being of questionable reality. Deep purple robes over white silk, a golden sash around his waist, jeweled rings on fingers that sometimes seemed solid and sometimes seemed to fade into mist. But it was his face that captured my attention and held it with magnetic force. Young and handsome in a classical way, with features that suggested noble birth and aristocratic breeding, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, a nose that was perfectly straight and proportioned. His skin, when it was solid enough to have skin, was the warm brown color of dates or polished wood. His hair was dark and thick, curling slightly at the ends where it touched his shoulders. But his eyes, oh, his eyes were what made him impossible to look away from. They were dark and bright at the same time, filled with an energy that seemed barely contained, like lightning trapped in a bottle. But underneath that energy, deeper down where most people wouldn't think to look, I could see something else, a weariness that spoke of suffering beyond measure, a sadness that went deeper than any physical wound, a loneliness so profound it made my own isolation seem trivial by comparison. Those eyes looked down at me, and I saw surprise flash across his features, followed by something that looked like genuine delight. And then he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh or a mocking laugh. It was pure joy, genuine happiness, the sound of someone who had just experienced something wonderful after a very, very long time without wonder. It was the laugh of a child seeing their first snowfall, or a prisoner stepping into sunlight after years of darkness. It was infectious and beautiful and completely unexpected. 300 years, he exclaimed, his voice rich and melodious, with an accent I had never heard before, something ancient and foreign but still somehow comprehensible. 300 years of darkness and silence and nothing, and then suddenly, miraculously, spectacularly, I am freed by... He paused, looking down at me more carefully, taking in my disheveled appearance, my cracked lips, my small frame trembling with exhaustion and shock and dehydration. His expression shifted, the joy tempering with concern. By a small, desperate, absolutely extraordinary girl, with eyes like midnight dates and the courage of a lioness, he finished, his tone becoming gentler, warmer. Well then, hello, mistress. Welcome to what is quite possibly the strangest moment of your entire life, though judging by the state of you, your life has been fairly strange already. I tried to speak, tried to ask what he was, who he was, what was happening, whether I had finally gone mad from thirst and was hallucinating my own death. But my throat was too dry, my voice too weak. All that emerged was a croak, a sound that was barely human, more like the cry of some dying desert animal. The man, the being, the whatever he was, seemed to notice my distress properly for the first time. His expression shifted from joy and curiosity to immediate alarm. "Oh," he said, his tone changing completely, becoming urgent and concerned. "Oh no. Oh, you're not doing well at all, are you? How long have you been without water? How long have you been wandering in this desert like some sort of determined ghost?" I held up 3 fingers with my trembling hand, managing to whisper a single word through my parched throat. "Days." His eyes widened dramatically. 3 days without water, in the desert? How are you even still conscious, let alone standing? That's actually impressive in an absolutely terrifying sort of way. You must be extraordinarily stubborn to still be alive. Also, probably delirious. Definitely in need of immediate help before you collapse and die on me, which would be a terrible way to start our acquaintance. He made a gesture, casual and yet somehow impossibly powerful. A wave of his hand that seemed to ripple through reality itself like a stone thrown into still water. The air shimmered around his fingers, and I felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of the world. And suddenly, impossibly, there was water. A full water skin appeared in my lap, materializing out of thin air, cool and beaded with condensation, as though it had just been pulled from a deep well. Beside it materialized fresh dates and flatbread, still warm as though just removed from an oven, their smell making my empty stomach clench with desperate hunger. I stared at these impossible gifts, my exhausted mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Water from nothing, food from empty air, magic, real magic, the kind that existed in grandmother's stories but not in the real world, except apparently it did exist in the real world, or at least it existed wherever this being came from. "Drink," he urged gently, kneeling down so that we were at eye level despite his greater height. His voice was warm now, genuinely concerned, with none of the theatrical quality of his earlier proclamations. "Please, mistress, drink, eat. You need to recover your strength before we can have any kind of meaningful conversation. And we do need to have a conversation, because you just released a djinn from 3 centuries of imprisonment, and there are protocols to follow, wishes to discuss, very important ancient magical contracts to honor. But first, and I cannot stress this enough, you need to not die of thirst. Dying would be very inconvenient for both of us." My hand shook as I reached for the water skin. I brought it to my lips and drank deeply, greedily, feeling the cool water flow down my parched throat like liquid salvation, like life itself being poured back into a body that had been slowly dying. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted, better than any wine or juice or sweet drink the Sultan had ever offered me in his palace. This was pure, clean water, cool and perfect, and it felt like it was washing away not just the physical thirst, but some deeper spiritual drought I hadn't even realized I was suffering from. I drank until my stomach protested, until I had to force myself to stop and breathe, gasping for air like someone who had been underwater too long. Then I tore into the dates and bread with desperate hunger I had been too focused on thirst to fully acknowledge. The sweetness of the dates exploded on my tongue, almost painfully intense. The bread was soft and fresh, tasting of wheat and honey, melting in my mouth. All the while the being, the djinn he had called himself, watched me with a mixture of concern and what might have been amusement. He waited patiently, not speaking, simply giving me time to address my body's most urgent needs. He sat cross-legged on the sand across from me, his form flickering occasionally between solid and translucent, and I noticed that when he was most solid, I could see the rise and fall of his chest as though he were breathing, though I suspected he didn't actually need to breathe in the way humans did. Finally, when I had eaten and drunk enough to feel marginally human again, when my hand stopped shaking quite so badly, and my vision cleared of the dark spots that had been dancing at the edges, I looked up at him properly and managed to croak out the question that seemed most important. "What are you?" He grinned, a smile that was equal parts mischief and genuine warmth, transforming his face from merely handsome to something approaching beautiful. He gave an elaborate bow that would have done credit to any royal court. One hand pressed to his chest, the other extended outward in a sweeping gesture. "I, my dear liberator, my desperate savior, my absolutely remarkable new mistress," he said with theatrical flourish that somehow didn't feel forced or mocking, "am your djinn, your wish-granting, formerly imprisoned, incredibly grateful djinn, and we, my small friend, are about to embark on quite the adventure together, whether we planned for it or not." He straightened from his bow and looked at me with those ancient young eyes, with that expression that held 300 years of suffering and yet somehow had not lost its capacity for joy, for wonder, for finding humor even in impossible circumstances. "My name is Haidar ibn Rashid," he continued, his tone becoming more formal, more serious, though a hint of smile still played at the corners of his mouth. "I was once crown prince of the northern kingdoms, heir to a throne that stretched from the mountain ranges to the sea. 3 centuries ago, I was cursed by someone I loved and trusted, transformed into a jinn and bound to serve whoever possesses my vessel. I grant 3 wishes, only 3, so choose them carefully, to whoever frees me from my prison. And you, he gestured to me with something that looked like genuine respect in his eyes. You have just freed me from imprisonment, which means I am bound to you now, obligated to grant you 3 wishes, anything your heart desires within the considerable bounds of my power. He paused, then added with a slight smile that softened the formality of his words, though I should mention, before you start making wishes in a panic, that you're the first person in 300 years who has shown any restraint at all. Most people use their first wish within moments of freeing me, usually asking for something impulsive and poorly thought out, wealth beyond measure, or the death of their enemies, or love potions that never quite work the way they hope. You, however, seem to have accidentally freed me while simply looking for water, which is refreshingly honest and also somewhat hilarious. There's no agenda here, no grand plan, just a desperate girl looking for survival. I find that rather charming, actually. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process this flood of information while my body was still recovering from near death by dehydration. A jinn, a real jinn, like in grandmother's stories, a being of magic and smoke who could grant wishes, who had been imprisoned for 300 years, who was now bound to serve me because I had opened his prison in a desperate search for water. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was... I'm hallucinating, I said slowly, my voice still hoarse but at least functioning again. I'm dying of thirst and exposure, and my brain has created this elaborate fantasy as it shuts down. You're not real. None of this is real. I'm probably actually collapsed in the sand somewhere, dying, and this is all just some kind of fever dream before the end. I assure you, I am very real, Hadar said, looking somewhat offended, though his eyes still held that hint of amusement. And you're not dying anymore, thanks to me and my magic water. Though I suppose if you want to verify my reality, you could always try to touch me. I'm mostly solid at the moment, or at least solid enough for human interaction. Go ahead, poke me if it will help convince you that you're not having a spectacular hallucination. He held out his arm expectantly, the sleeve of his purple robe falling back to reveal a forearm that looked solid enough, with warm brown skin over what appeared to be actual muscle and bone. I reached out with one trembling hand, half expecting my fingers to pass through him like smoke, but when I touched his forearm, it felt real. Warm skin over muscle, solid and present, despite the slight shimmer that suggested he was not entirely of this world. I could feel his pulse, or something like a pulse, beating steadily beneath my fingertips. Real, I whispered, pulling my hand back as though I'd touched something hot. You're real. This is really happening. Very real, Hadar confirmed, settling back onto the sand with a satisfied expression. And yes, this is really happening. You've just had the most extraordinary stroke of luck or fate or destiny. Pick whichever explanation pleases you most. You opened a vessel that has been sealed for longer than most kingdoms have existed, and you freed a jinn prince who has been waiting 3 centuries for someone to give him even a moment of genuine human connection. So, my mysterious rescuer, my accidental liberator, perhaps you could tell me, who are you? What's your name? And more importantly, what is a girl like you, clearly educated and well-born, judging by the way you speak and carry yourself despite your current disheveled state, doing dying of thirst in the middle of the desert with nothing but a stolen vessel for company? I opened my mouth to answer, to tell him my story, to try to explain the impossible series of events that had led me to this moment. But before I could speak, before I could form even the first words, exhaustion and relief and the shock of everything that had just happened suddenly overwhelmed me all at once. The world swam. My vision darkened at the edges, closing in like a tunnel. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright and functional finally drained away, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness. I felt myself falling forward, consciousness slipping away, like water through my fingers. The last thing I was aware of was Hadar catching me, his arms surprisingly solid and strong despite their occasional translucence. His voice saying something that sounded concerned, but which I could no longer quite process, the words turning into meaningless sound as darkness claimed me. And then there was nothing, no pain, no fear, no thirst, no exhaustion, just darkness and rest, and for the first time in 3 days of desperate flight, I felt safe. Safe in the arms of a Jinn prince who had been imprisoned for 300 years. Safe in the middle of a desert where I should have died. Safe, impossibly, miraculously safe. And as consciousness faded completely, my last thought was a question that would have to wait for waking to be answered. What in the name of all the gods had I just gotten myself into? Chapter 5. The Weight of Ancient Sorrows. I woke to the sensation of coolness against my skin, a blessed relief after days of relentless heat. My eyes opened slowly, adjusting to a soft, filtered light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. For a moment, I could not remember where I was, could not piece together the fragmented memories that swirled through my mind like sand in a storm. Then it all came rushing back, the escape, the desert, the vessel, the impossible being made of smoke and magic who had emerged when I opened it, the Jinn, Hadar ibn Rashid, who claimed to be a prince cursed 3 centuries ago, who said he was bound to grant me 3 wishes. I sat up quickly, too quickly, and the world spun dizzyingly around me. A hand steadied my shoulder, gentle but firm, and I found myself looking into those strange, ancient yet young eyes. "Careful," Hadar said, his voice holding that same mixture of concern and amusement I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "You fainted rather dramatically after drinking and eating. I caught you naturally. Couldn't have my new mistress cracking her head open on the desert floor within moments of freeing me. That would have been terribly anticlimactic and also quite tragic." I looked around, trying to understand where we were. We seemed to be in some kind of shelter, a structure made of fabric that was neither quite solid nor quite transparent, that seemed to exist somewhere between reality and dream. It was cool inside, blessedly cool, despite the fact that I could see the desert sun blazing beyond the translucent walls. The floor beneath me was soft, more comfortable than sand had any right to be, and there was a gentle breeze flowing through despite the walls having no visible openings. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice still hoarse despite the water I had drunk. "Did you create this?" "I did," Hadar confirmed, looking rather pleased with himself, like a child showing off a particularly impressive sandcastle. "You needed shelter from the sun, that much was obvious from your condition, and I needed to make sure you didn't die of exposure while unconscious. That would have been a waste of a dramatic rescue. So I conjured this little temporary refuge. Nothing fancy by Jinn standards, just basic protection from the elements. It will last until sunset, and then it will fade away as though it never existed. That's the nature of temporary magic, useful but ephemeral, like morning dew or a pleasant dream." "Magic," I repeated, the word feeling strange and heavy on my tongue. "Real magic, not tricks or illusions, but actual magic that changes reality." The realest kind, Haydar said, his expression becoming slightly more serious. Though I should clarify, and this is important, so listen carefully, what you're seeing, what I can do, it's not without cost. Every act of magic, every wish granted, every alteration of reality, it takes something from me. But we'll get to that later. First, I want to hear your story. You promised, well, you started to promise before you fainted, to tell me who you are and what you're doing in the middle of a desert with nothing but a stolen vessel and a determination that borders on suicidal stubbornness. So I told him. Sitting in that impossible shelter with a being of smoke and magic, listening attentively, I told him everything. About my childhood in the oasis, about my family and my grandmother's stories, about great loves and impossible adventures, about the raiders who came when I was 16, about being stolen from everything I knew and sold to the sultan's harem, like a piece of particularly attractive livestock, about 9 years of captivity, 9 years of being treated as a beautiful object rather than a person, of learning to hide my true self so deep that sometimes I wondered if she still existed at all, or if the Sultan had successfully erased her and replaced her with the compliant, smiling thing he wanted me to be. I told him about my escape, about standing on the palace roof and choosing freedom even if it meant death, about stealing the vessel on impulse because it called to me in ways I could not explain, because it felt important in a way that transcended monetary value. About the old woman at the caravanserai who helped me despite the risk to herself, who gave me clothes and supplies and directions because she had lost her own daughter and wanted to save someone else's. About 3 days of walking through the desert with dwindling supplies and growing desperation. About the moment when my water ran out and I opened the vessel hoping for anything, any small miracle that might keep me alive. Haydar listened to all of it without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded, the playfulness fading from his eyes to be replaced by something deeper. Understanding, empathy, recognition of suffering that matched his own in its intensity if not its specifics. When I finished, when my voice finally gave out and I sat there looking at my hands, unable to meet his eyes because I was afraid of what I might see there, pity, perhaps, or disgust at what I had become during those years of captivity, he was silent for a long moment. 9 years, he said finally, his voice softer than I had yet heard it, stripped of all theatrical flourish. 9 years of captivity, of being owned and used and treated as a thing rather than a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams of her own. I understand that more than you might think, Safia. I looked up at him, startled not just by the understanding in his voice, but by the fact that he had used my name even though I didn't remember telling him what it was. He smiled slightly at my expression. You said your name in your sleep, he explained gently. You were dreaming, muttering to yourself. You kept saying, Safia has to survive, and Safia won't give up, as though you were reminding yourself who you were, making sure you didn't forget. It was... He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. It was survival, I said quietly. In the harem, I had to become someone else during the day, had to pretend to be the Sultan's favorite. But at night, I would whisper my real name to myself like a prayer, like a promise. Safia. I am Safia. Not his favorite, not his possession, but Safia, the girl who loved healing and stories, who dreamed of freedom and love. I was terrified that if I stopped saying the name, stopped reminding myself, I would forget who I was entirely. I did the same thing, Haydar said, and now I could see the weight of centuries in his eyes, the burden of suffering that his cheerful demeanor tried to hide. For 300 years, every time I was pulled from the vessel to grant wishes, I would say to myself, I am Haidar ibn Rashid. I was a prince. I believed in honor and love and justice. I am not just a tool, not just a wish-granting machine. I am a person who once had dreams and hopes and a future. I said it like a mantra, like a lifeline, trying to keep some core of myself intact, even as pieces were being taken away with each wish granted. Pieces being taken away? I asked, remembering what he had said earlier about magic having a cost. What do you mean? Haidar's expression became even more serious, and he looked away from me, out through the translucent walls of our shelter to the desert beyond. The curse that binds me as a jinn is designed to be a punishment, he said slowly, as though each word cost him something. It allows me to grant wishes, yes, to work magic that can reshape reality in profound ways, but it also ensures that I pay for every miracle with pieces of myself, my essence, my will, my soul, my sense of who Haidar ibn Rashid is, as opposed to what the jinn can do. Bit by bit, with each wish granted, I erode. I become less real, less present, less myself. He turned back to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten with sympathy and rage, a vulnerability so profound it hurt to witness. The curse is designed so that if someone were to use all three wishes on powerful, complex magic, I would fade away almost entirely. He continued, I would become nothing but animated smoke with barely any consciousness left. No memories, no personality, no Haidar, just a tool without thought or feeling, existing only to serve wishes and then return to darkness. A thing, not a person. Sound familiar? It did sound familiar, horribly, intimately familiar. It was exactly what the Sultan had been trying to do to me. Erase Safiya and replace her with an obedient thing that existed only for his pleasure. That's monstrous, I said, and I was surprised by the vehemence in my voice, by the anger that surged through me on behalf of this being I had known for less than a day. Who would create such a curse? Who would be that cruel? Someone who wanted to punish me for a very long time. Haidar said, his voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested great pain being held at bay by sheer force of will. Someone who wanted me to suffer not through pain. Pain ends, after all, either when you die or when you become numb to it, but through slow erasure, through the gradual loss of everything that made me who I was. And over 300 years, serving dozens of people who used all three wishes without a thought for what it cost me. He paused, and I saw his hands clench into fists before deliberately relaxing them again. I've lost so much of who I was, he said quietly. So much of Haidar ibn Rashid, the prince who believed in honor and love and the fundamental goodness of people. What remains is a shadow, a remnant, a damaged thing trying desperately to remember what it was like to be whole, to be real, to matter as something more than a means to someone else's ends. Without thinking, without considering whether it was appropriate or welcome, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and solid in mine, and I held on tightly, trying to communicate through touch what I couldn't quite put into words, that I saw him, that I understood, that his suffering mattered to me. Then I will not use my wishes, I said firmly, my voice stronger now, filled with conviction. I will not add to your suffering. We'll find another way to survive, another path forward that doesn't require you to sacrifice more of yourself. There has to be another way. You have to use the wishes, Haidar said gently, his free hand coming up to cover mine where it held his, creating a warm cocoon of hands and understanding between us. That's part of the magic, part of how the curse works. The vessel cannot be sealed again until all three wishes are used, or formally declined by the person who opened it. And if you decline all 3 wishes without using any of them, I go back into the vessel immediately, back into darkness and silence. And the next person who opens it gets their 3 wishes instead. There's no way around it, Safia. The wishes must be used. That's the law of the binding, written into the very fabric of the magic itself. Then I'll use them carefully, I said, my mind already working through possibilities, looking for loopholes and clever solutions, the way I had learned to do during 9 years of navigating the harem's dangerous social landscape. Small wishes, simple ones that require minimal magic, things I might be able to do myself if I just had a little help or a small advantage. Would that reduce the cost to you? It would, Hadar admitted, and something like hope flickered in his eyes. That's actually brilliant, Safia. Yes, small, simple wishes cost far less than large, complex ones. The more I have to reshape reality, the more fundamental the change I have to make, the more it takes from me. But if you ask for small things, achievable things, things that are within the natural realm of possibility and just need a little push, that's sustainable magic. That's magic I can do without losing too much of myself. Then that's what I'll do, I said firmly. And Hadar, I looked at him directly, holding his gaze, trying to pour all my sincerity into my words. I promise you this right now, on my name and my honor and everything I hold sacred. My 3rd wish, no matter what happens, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, will be used to free you from this curse, to break your bondage completely and permanently. That's not negotiable, that's not open for discussion, that's decided. What? Hadar looked genuinely shocked, his eyes going wide, his mouth falling slightly open. Safia, no, you can't, that's one of your 3 wishes. You could use it for anything. You could wish to be reunited with your family, transported instantly to their oasis, safe from all pursuit. You could wish for revenge on the Sultan, for him to suffer as he made you suffer. You could wish for wealth beyond measure that would ensure you never had to fear poverty or powerlessness again. You could wish for a guarantee of safety for the rest of your life, protection from anyone who might ever try to harm or capture you again. You could wish for anything, and you're just going to throw away that kind of power on freeing someone you met less than a day ago? Yes, I said simply, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. I am, because you've been imprisoned for 300 years, Hadar. 300 years, and every person who had the chance to free you chose not to. They took their wishes and walked away and left you in darkness. Well, I'm not them. I'm not going to do that. You deserve freedom. You deserve to choose your own path, to live your own life, to be Hadar ibn Rashid again instead of just a tool for granting wishes. And if it costs me a wish to give you that, then it's a wish well spent. But you barely know me, Hadar protested, though I could see emotions warring in his face, gratitude fighting with guilt, hope battling with the fear of believing in something that might be taken away. I could be lying about everything. I could be dangerous. I could be— You're not, I interrupted, my voice gentle but certain. You're not lying, and you're not dangerous, at least not to me. I can see it in your eyes, Hadar. I spent 9 years learning to read people, learning to see beneath the surface because my survival depended on understanding who might help me and who might betray me. I'm good at seeing the truth beneath the lies, and when I look at you, I see someone who has suffered, who has been used, who has been treated as less than human for far too long. I see someone who understands exactly what I've been through because you've been through something parallel to it. How could I look at you, knowing what I know, understanding what I understand, and choose to leave you in bondage? How could I live with myself if I did that? Hadar stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, the careful guardedness falling away to reveal raw emotion beneath. His eyes, which had held such careful amusement and theatrical cheer, filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. "You're impossible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Impossibly kind, impossibly stubborn, impossibly willing to sacrifice your own advantage for a stranger who doesn't deserve it." "You're not a stranger anymore," I pointed out gently. "You're someone who saved my life with magic water. You're someone who created shelter so I wouldn't die of exposure. You're someone who listened to my story without judgment, who understood without needing lengthy explanations, who sees me as Safiya rather than as the Sultan's escaped favorite. That's not a stranger. That's—" I paused, searching for the right word. "That's a friend, perhaps, if you want to be." "I would like that very much," Hadar said softly, one hand coming up to wipe at his eyes, though the tears kept falling. "I haven't had a friend in 300 years, Safiya. Just masters and mistresses who used me and sealed me away, who saw me as a means to an end rather than as a person worth knowing. The idea of friendship, of genuine connection rather than just obligation and magical binding." His voice caught. "Yes, I would very much like to be your friend." We smiled at each other, tears on both our faces now, and in that moment something shifted between us. We were not just djinn and mistress, not just magical servant and desperate refugee. We were two people who had found each other in impossible circumstances, who recognized in each other a shared experience of captivity and a shared longing for genuine freedom, genuine connection, genuine life beyond mere survival. "So," I said eventually, breaking the emotional intensity of the moment before it became too heavy to bear, "I need to make my first wish at some point. Something practical and small, just enough to help us survive while we figure out what comes next. Do you have any suggestions?" "Well," Hadar said, clearly grateful for the shift to more practical matters, wiping his eyes one more time before pulling himself together, "you'll need supplies to cross the rest of the desert. Water and food, certainly. Shelter from the sun during the day when it's too hot to travel. Perhaps some way to disguise yourself or hide from pursuers, though that gets into more complex magic that would cost more. What do you think you need most urgently?" I thought about it, considering our situation carefully. "I need supplies for several more days of travel," I said slowly. "Water and food that will last, and shelter from the sun, yes, something that will let me rest during the day without dying of heat. But nothing elaborate or fancy, just basic survival necessities. Can you do that without it costing you too much?" Hadar considered this, his expression thoughtful and focused in a way that made him look more like the prince he claimed to have been, and less like the theatrical magical being he sometimes pretended to be. "That's actually a very reasonable first wish," he said after a moment. "Modest, practical, aimed at immediate survival rather than grand ambitions or revenge fantasies. Yes, I can do that without excessive cost. It will still take something from me, any magic does, but it's far less than if you'd asked me to transport you across the desert instantly, or to make you wealthy, or to destroy your enemies, or any of the other dramatic things people usually wish for. This is sustainable magic, helpful magic, good magic if such a thing exists." "Then that's my first wish," I said formally, understanding somehow that wishes needed to be stated clearly and completely to work properly. "I wish for water and food sufficient for several days of desert travel, and for shelter from the sun that will keep me safe during the hottest parts of the day, when I need to rest. Please grant this wish in the way that costs you the least amount of essence possible, while still fulfilling the need." Hadar smiled at my careful phrasing, at the way I had explicitly asked him to minimize the cost to himself. "You really are trying to protect me, aren't you?" he said softly. "Even when making your wishes, even when asking for things you desperately need, you're thinking about how to reduce the harm to me. That's—" He paused, seeming unable to find words adequate to express what he was feeling. "That's the kindest thing anyone has done for me in 3 centuries. Just grant the wish, Hadar," I said, but my voice was gentle and I was smiling. "As you command," he replied, but there was warmth in his formality, affection in his obedience. He stood and made a gesture that was becoming familiar, that casual yet powerful movement of his hand that somehow rewrote small pieces of reality. I watched in fascination as the temporary shelter around us solidified slightly, became more permanent without becoming completely physical. It was still made of that strange, not quite fabric that existed between states, but now it felt more stable, more reliable, as though it would last for days rather than hours. Then provisions began to appear around me. Water skins materialized out of thin air, already filled with cool, clean water that beaded on the outside as though they had just been pulled from a deep well. Packages of food appeared, dates and dried figs, flatbread that smelled freshly baked, dried meat that had been perfectly preserved, even a small flask of honey that glowed golden in the filtered light. But as these supplies appeared, as the magic worked its impossible transformations, I saw what I had feared I would see. Hadar's form flickered more noticeably than before, becoming translucent for several long seconds before solidifying again. His face, which had been animated and expressive, showed new lines of strain around the eyes and mouth. His shoulders sagged slightly, as though he had just set down a very heavy burden or picked up a new one. "You're hurt," I said immediately, starting to rise, wanting to go to him even though I had no idea how to help a being made partly of smoke. "The magic hurt you." "Not hurt exactly," Hadar said, though his voice was weaker than before, less vibrant. "Just diminished. Just a little less real, a little less solid, a little less Hadar, and a little more just the djinn who grants wishes. That's the nature of the curse, the price of magic. But I'll stabilize. I always do eventually. It just takes time for my essence to settle after working magic, to find its new equilibrium." "How much time?" I asked, worry making my voice sharp. "A few hours usually, sometimes a day or 2 if the wish was particularly complex. But yours was simple enough, focused enough, that I should recover relatively quickly. Don't worry about me, Safia. Focus on resting and preparing for the next stage of your journey. We still have to figure out how to get you safely across the rest of the desert and away from those hunters who are undoubtedly still following your trail. But I did worry. I worried because I could see the cost my simple wish had extracted, could see how much it had weakened him even though he tried to hide it behind reassuring words and a brave smile. And if this was the price for basic survival supplies, what would it cost for larger wishes? What would happen when I used my 3rd wish to free him? Would that final act of liberation take everything he had left, or would it restore what had been taken? These were questions for later, I decided. Right now, in this moment, I needed to accept the gift he had given me and use it wisely. I needed to rest and recover my own strength so that when night fell and the desert became cool enough for travel, I would be ready to continue my journey. "Thank you, Hadar," I said sincerely, my eyes meeting his. "For the wish, for the supplies, for your willingness to help me even though it costs you. I won't forget this, and I won't break my promise. I will find a way to free you. That's not just a wish I'll make eventually, that's a vow. I believe you, Hadar said, and the trust in his voice, the simple faith that I would keep my word, touched me more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have. Now rest. You've been through an ordeal that would have killed most people, and you need to let your body recover. I'll keep watch, make sure nothing approaches while you sleep. You're safe here, Safia. I promise you that. Whatever I may have lost in terms of essence or solidity, I still have more than enough magic to keep one small, stubborn girl safe from harm. What about you? I asked. Don't you need to rest too? I don't sleep the way humans do, Hadar said, settling himself near the entrance of our shelter, where he could watch the desert beyond. One of the few advantages of being partly made of smoke, I can rest and remain alert simultaneously, exist in a state between waking and sleeping. It's hard to explain to someone who experiences consciousness in a purely linear way. That sounds lonely, I said softly. Never fully sleeping, never fully resting. It is lonely, Hadar admitted, and for a moment his careful cheer fell away entirely, revealing the profound isolation beneath. Very lonely. But then, most of my existence for the past 3 centuries has been lonely. At least now I have someone to keep watch over, someone worth protecting. That makes the loneliness a little easier to bear. I wanted to say something, wanted to offer comfort or understanding, or at least acknowledgement of his pain. But exhaustion was pulling at me again, my body demanding the rest it had been denied for too long. My eyes were growing heavy, despite my desire to stay awake and keep Hadar company in his lonely vigil. Sleep, Safia, Hadar said gently, noticing my struggle. We'll have time to talk more when you wake. For now, just rest. Dream of good things if you can, of your family, of freedom, of the life you'll build once you're truly safe. Dream of possibilities rather than fears. So I lay down on the soft, impossible floor of our magical shelter, and I let my eyes close, and I let sleep claim me. And surprisingly, blessedly, I did dream of good things. I dreamed of my grandmother's stories and my mother's smile, and my father's gentle hands teaching me to heal. I dreamed of oases and starlight, of possibilities I had thought were lost forever. And through all of it, a presence, warm and protective and somehow both ancient and young, both powerful and vulnerable, watched over me, keeping the darkness and the nightmares at bay. For the first time in 9 years, I slept without fear. And when I woke, Hadar was still there, still watching, still keeping his promise. My friend, my djinn, my unexpected miracle in a desert that should have been my grave. Chapter 6. Hunters in the Darkness. I woke to find the shelter still intact, but the light outside changing, the harsh brightness of day fading into the softer golds and oranges of evening. Hadar sat exactly where he had been when I fell asleep, though he looked more solid now, more present, as though the hours of rest had allowed his essence to stabilize somewhat. The hunters, I said immediately, the thought coming to me as consciousness returned. Where are they? How close? Hadar's expression became serious. About half a day behind us, moving steadily. 7 men on horseback, just as you described. They're following your trail, though the winds have helped obscure it somewhat. They haven't given up, Safia. Men like that never do. It's a matter of professional pride now, not just following orders. We began to plan our next moves. The shelter would fade at sunset, as Hadar had explained, so we needed to be ready to travel. I ate more of the food he had conjured, drank deeply from the water skins, feeling my strength gradually returning. As we prepared, Hadar told me more about his life before the curse, about the northern kingdoms and the prince he had been, and gradually, carefully, he told me about Yasmin, the woman he had loved, who had orchestrated his curse because she wanted power more than love. The pain in his voice as he spoke of that betrayal was acute, 3 centuries old, but still raw. I understood it intimately, the pain of being used by someone you trusted, of realizing you were never valued as a person, but only as a means to an end. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" I said when he finished his story. The runaway slave and the cursed prince, both trying to remember how to be people instead of possessions. "We are," Hadar agreed. "But perhaps that's why we found each other. Perhaps that's why the universe, or fate, or chance, or whatever you want to call it, put us in each other's paths. We understand each other in ways that people who haven't experienced that particular kind of captivity never could." As night fell and we prepared to continue our journey, Hadar made himself invisible to conserve energy, becoming nothing but a presence I could sense beside me. We traveled through the cooling desert, heading always east, following stars and hope and each other. But behind us, patient and relentless, the hunters followed. And ahead of us, unknown challenges waited. 3 more nights of travel brought us to the edge of a major caravan route. We had been rationing the supplies carefully, and Hadar's invisible presence had helped us avoid several dangerous situations, including one encounter with desert bandits that he diverted with subtle magic that left him weakened for half a day afterward. When we finally spotted the merchant caravan in the distance, it felt like a miracle. A large group of traders heading east, their camels laden with goods, their campfires bright against the night. "This could be our chance," I said to Hadar's invisible presence. "If I can join them, I'll have protection and companionship for the rest of the journey. They won't be looking for a girl traveling with a caravan." "What will you tell them?" Hadar asked. "They'll want to know who you are, where you came from." "I'll say I'm a widow whose husband died protecting me from bandits," I said. "It's a common enough story in these times. And I'll offer my healing skills in exchange for passage. Most caravans need someone who knows medicine." It worked even better than I had hoped. The caravan leader, a large man named Rashad, was initially suspicious, but warmed to me when I successfully treated his young son, who had fallen ill with a fever. My healing skills, learned from my father so long ago, proved their worth, and soon I was accepted as part of the traveling group. Hadar remained invisible to everyone but me, occasionally whispering comments and observations that made me struggle not to laugh at inappropriate moments. Having him near, even unseen, made the journey feel less daunting, but our respite was brief. On the 3rd night with the caravan, the hunters found us. They arrived without warning, riding into the camp and demanding that Rashad hand over the fugitive slave they knew was traveling with him. The scarred leader, the one who had nearly caught me before, stood in the firelight and described me with perfect accuracy. I watched from behind a wagon, my heart pounding as Rashad looked troubled. He knew who they were talking about. He had realized, somewhere along the way, that my story of a dead husband wasn't entirely true. "Give her up," the hunter said, his voice cold, "or we'll burn this caravan to the ground and kill everyone in it. Your choice." I couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let these people who had shown me kindness die because of me. I started to step forward, to surrender myself to save them. And then Hadar's invisible voice hissed in my ear, Don't you dare sacrifice yourself. Not after everything. Trust me, Safia. Just this once, let me use magic to save you. Please." Before I could respond, the night exploded with light and sound. Hadar's magic manifested as illusion and confusion rather than direct violence. The ground beneath the hunters' horses seemed to turn to quicksand, causing panic. Strange lights danced in the air, disorienting and frightening. Within moments, the 7 hunters were scattered and fleeing, convinced they had encountered some kind of supernatural force. The caravan was saved, but the cost to Hadar was visible even in his invisible state. I could feel his presence weakening, could sense him struggling to maintain coherence. When we were finally alone again, when the caravan had settled and people had returned to their tents, still talking excitedly about what they had witnessed, Hadar materialized beside me looking more translucent than ever. "That was incredibly foolish," I said, though my voice shook with gratitude and fear in equal measure. "You could have faded away entirely. You said complex magic like that cost too much. You were going to surrender yourself to save them," Hadar replied, his voice weak. "What else was I supposed to do? Watch you throw away your freedom to protect people you barely know?" "They showed me kindness," I said. "I couldn't let them die for that." "And you showed me kindness," Hadar countered. "I couldn't let you sacrifice yourself when I had the power to prevent it." "That's what friends do, Sophia. They protect each other, even when it costs them." We argued gently but intensely about responsibility and cost and the weight of the promises we had made to each other. And eventually, reluctantly, I made a decision. "I need to use my second wish," I said finally. "Not to escape, not to run away from this situation entirely, but to buy us time and safety, to make sure the hunters can't follow us anymore, that they lose our trail completely and give up. Can you do that? Can you make it so they can't find me without it costing you everything you have left?" Hadar was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, I can do that. It will cost me, but not as much as the illusions did. And it will be worth it if it means you can travel safely to your destination." So I spoke my second wish carefully, asking for safe passage and freedom from pursuit, for the hunters to lose our trail and abandon their search, asking Hadar to fulfill it in whatever way cost him the least. The magic that followed was subtle, almost invisible. No lights or illusions this time, just small changes. A shift in the wind that covered our tracks completely, a failure in the hunters' tracking skills that sent them in the wrong direction, a growing conviction among them that perhaps the Sultan's runaway slave had died in the desert after all and wasn't worth pursuing further. When it was done, Hadar collapsed into full translucence, barely visible even to me. "2 wishes used," he whispered. "1 left. And then I free you," I completed. "That's the promise, and I will keep it. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe where you can recover, and I need to find my family if they're still out there, if they're still alive." "Your family," Hadar repeated, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely despite his near invisibility. "What?" I asked. "What aren't you telling me?" "The caravan is heading toward a settlement near where your old oasis was," Hadar said. "Rashad mentioned it earlier. There are people there who might know what happened to your family, whether they survived, where they went. You might actually be close to finding them, Sophia. Close to going home. Home." The word hit me like a physical force, bringing tears to my eyes. After 9 years of captivity and weeks of desperate flight, I might actually be going home. The settlement was everything and nothing like I remembered. My family's oasis had changed. Buildings had been rebuilt, new people had arrived, old faces had aged or disappeared. But the essential character of the place, the warmth of the desert people, remained. And miraculously, impossibly, my family was there. My mother and father, older but alive, who had never stopped hoping I would return. The reunion was everything I had dreamed of. Tears and embraces and the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen and valued and loved. Hadar witnessed all of this, still mostly invisible, and I could sense his emotions even without seeing his face. Joy for my happiness, longing for the family he had lost 3 centuries ago, and something deeper, something neither of us was quite ready to name. Over the weeks that followed, as I settled into life at the oasis, as I helped my father with healing work and reconnected with my mother and extended family. Haydar and I grew closer. He made himself visible sometimes, becoming part of the community, though people were understandably wary of a jinn in their midst. But they came to accept him as they saw how he was with me, gentle and protective and utterly devoted in a way that had nothing to do with magical binding and everything to do with genuine affection. "I'm falling in love with you," Haydar told me one night under the stars, his voice quiet and almost afraid. "I know I shouldn't. I know it's impossible. I'm a jinn and you're human, and even if you free me with your third wish, I'll just be a man out of time, a prince from a dead kingdom with nothing to offer you. But I can't help it. You make me feel human again. You make me remember what it was like to hope for things, to want things beyond just survival." "I'm falling in love with you too," I admitted, my own voice shaking. "But I don't know how this can work. When I use my third wish to free you, what happens then? Do you disappear back to wherever jinn come from? Do you become mortal but then leave to find what remains of your old life? Do we have any future together? Or is this just a beautiful, impossible thing that will break both our hearts?" "I don't know," Haydar said honestly. "I've never heard of anyone actually using their third wish to free a bound jinn. I don't know what will happen, but Sophia, I do know this. If I have any choice in the matter, if freeing me means I become truly free to choose my own path, then I choose you. I choose this life, this place, this future we could build together. I don't want to reclaim some ancient throne or return to a past that no longer exists. I want to stay here with you and build something new." The third wish came on a night when the entire settlement gathered to witness something no one had seen before, a jinn being freed from his curse. I spoke the words clearly, my voice not wavering. "Haydar ibn Rashid, I use my third and final wish. I wish for you to be free, completely free from the curse that binds you, from the vessel that imprisoned you, from the obligation to serve wishes. I wish for your essence to be restored, for all that was taken to be returned, for you to become fully yourself again. Be free, Haydar. Choose your own path. Live your own life." The magic that exploded from him was like sunrise condensed into a single moment. Golden light that blazed brighter than the sun, warm and beautiful and transformative. It swirled around him, through him, lifting him off the ground as centuries of stolen essence came flooding back. And when the light finally faded, Haydar stood before us completely solid, fully human, no longer flickering or translucent. He was mortal now, flesh and blood, and fully present in a way he hadn't been for 300 years. He looked at his hands in wonder, flexing his fingers, feeling the solidity of his own body. Then he looked at me, and his eyes, no longer holding that otherworldly shimmer but purely, beautifully human, filled with tears. "I'm free," he whispered, "truly free. You did it, Safia. You actually did it." "Of course I did it," I said, moving toward him, taking his solid, warm, mortal hands in mine. "I promised, didn't I? I keep my promises." "So do I," Haydar said. And then, in front of my family and the entire settlement, he knelt and asked me to marry him. Not because magic compels me, not because I owe you a debt, but because I love you. Because you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Because I want to spend whatever years I have left, and I'm mortal now, so they're definitely limited, building a life with you. Will you have me, Sophia? Will you let me stay?" "Yes," I said, pulling him up to stand with me, not wanting him to kneel before anyone ever again. "Yes, you can stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." Chapter Epilogue. where stars touch sand. We married under the same stars that had guided me across the desert, in a ceremony that blended ancient traditions with new beginnings. Hadar wore simple desert clothing, having left behind the trappings of ancient royalty. I wore blue and silver, the colors of water and starlight. We built a life together in the oasis, combining his 300-year accumulation of knowledge with my healing skills. We had children who grew up hearing stories about cursed princes and brave girls and the power of keeping promises. We grew old together, our hair turning silver, our bodies becoming weathered by sun and time. And every evening we would walk to the edge of the oasis and look up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed our impossible meeting and our even more impossible love. "Do you ever regret it?" Hadar asked me once, when we were old and surrounded by grandchildren, "using your third wish to free me instead of for something that would have benefited you directly?" "Never," I said firmly, as I had said every time he asked that question over the decades. How could I regret choosing love? That wish gave me everything I ever wanted, not wealth or power or revenge, but partnership, choice, a life built on genuine connection rather than ownership. "I love you," Hadar said as he said every day, across centuries and curses, through captivity and freedom. "I love you." "And I love you," I replied, as I always did. We lived full lives and died peacefully, passing from the world within hours of each other, as though neither could bear to exist without the other. And the story we left behind became legend, a tale told and retold across generations, taking its place among the great stories of 1001 Nights. For in the end, this was not a story about magic or wishes or supernatural beings. It was a story about two people who refused to let captivity define them, who chose love over fear, who believed that freedom and connection were worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. It was a story about keeping promises, about seeing each other truly, about choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. And it was a story that, like all the best stories, never truly ends. It simply transforms, taking new shapes for new audiences, reminding each generation that love is more powerful than magic, that freedom is worth any cost, and that the choices we make define who we are far more than the circumstances we're born into. This was the tale of Safiya the healer and Hadar the prince, who found each other in the desert and chose each other for always. May their love inspire your dreams. May their courage light your path. May you always remember, you are never truly powerless. You always have choices, and you are always deserving of being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are. Rest now, dear listener. The story is told. The stars are watching, and tomorrow your own story continues. The end.